I just finished watching The Mandalorian Season 3, Episode 7. This was Chapter 23 overall, and it was titled The Spies. And oh boy, was this episode a step up on multiple levels, guys. We're really cooking with gas here. This episode had me shouting and pointing at my TV on more than one occasion. It had great directing and an amazing score. This episode had a great balance of fun and adventure with plot and character development. We also had a shocking, unexpected number of connections to the sequel trilogy, and this episode featured our first real massive loss for our main character since the end of Season 1 of this show. Before I go too deep on my thoughts for this episode, I just want to offer my quick thoughts on the sequel trilogy and the connections to the sequel trilogy in this episode, because I know for some people that's an extremely important topic. I am not the kind of guy who's going to notice a connection to the sequel and throw a fit or immediately write off the entire episode. Basically, if we're getting a good, fascinating story, I don't care what era of Star Wars is being referenced. And I say this as someone who happens to feel the sequel trilogy is a prime example of what happens when you don't have a plan, and I was left with a bad taste in my mouth after episode 9. There's still aspects of the sequel trilogy that I enjoy, and if you love the sequel trilogy, I'm really happy for you, but that's just how I feel. Let's get into my thoughts on this particular episode. This episode wastes no time and opens on some real big picture stuff. We pick up with the leadership of what remains of the Empire and will eventually become the First Order. Most importantly, we get the return of Giancarlo Esposito's Moff Gideon. We also have a relative of General Hux, either his father or his brother, I'm not sure, maybe someone could let me know. And most excitingly to me, we have Thrawn's buddy Pelion. We see Thrawn's absence is starting to become a problem for this Imperial leadership, and they're tired of waiting for him to reappear. Since the group has decided they're tired of waiting for Thrawn, Gideon proposes their first order of business is dealing with the threat of the Mandalorians. Any force that can grow to rival the power of the Empire is deemed a threat, and that will be the crux of this episode, and I'm assuming the next few episodes. It's the Empire versus Mandalorians. The group refers to Project Necromancer, and this has to be about the creation and cloning of either Palpatine or Snoke. I'm admittedly really excited to see how this plays out, and if they could pull it off. As if that weren't enough of a sequel connection, we get Praetorian Guards name dropped. This is their earliest canon mention that I know of, and I'm really interested to see if we're going to get more of their backstory. Next, we pick up with Bo, Din, Grogu, and all the Mandalorians that they've picked up in their effort to reunite Mandalore, Axe Woves, Koska Reeves, and that whole crew. And that's exactly what we get in this sequence. Two very different peoples reuniting for the first time. It kind of feels like the Pilgrims and the Native Americans meeting. It's kind of shot like West Side Story with both of these big groups facing off. Truthfully, I thought this series was going to end with the Mandalorian covert abandoning their ways for a more secular way of being, but I really like the route the show is taking with this. They're emphasizing that it's okay to be different. Season 2 of this show is kind of all about emphasizing that there's different ways to be a Mandalorian, and those differences are okay. I think in this day and age, that's an important message. Next, we have an extremely fun moment where Greef introduces Din and Grogu to the new but not so improved IG-11, whose name is IG-12. Earlier when I said that this episode had a good balance of storytelling with plot and character development, and also fun moments, this is what I had in mind. IG-12 needs to be controlled manually, and as if it wasn't funny and cute enough to see Babu Frick behind the wheel, we get to see Grogu in this thing, and this got a massive laugh out of me. But truthfully, it serves as more than just a fun moment. It's a massive upgrade for Grogu's capabilities. Grogu has a good head on his shoulders, and he's able to work things out pretty well. It's like the mind of a young man and the body of a baby. This mech suit of sorts, which is something I never expected to see, kind of levels the playing field for Grogu, and gives him some physical capability to match his intellect. We get an example of this later in the episode when he's able to break up a fight. That fight happens on Mandalore, and that's actually a huge aspect of this episode. For some time we've known that aside from reuniting the Mandalorians as a people, a big point of this show has been retaking Mandalore itself. And this episode, at least for a moment, gives us our first real progress towards that goal. Bo takes a unit of some of our favorite Mandalorians from each tribe on a mission to re-establish a presence on Mandalore. This is the first real act of unification that we see between these two people. It was also really fun and fascinating to see these Mandalorians get their first look at Mandalore ever, or in a very, very long time. Their goal is to establish a base at the Great Forge, which is something that we've heard about several times but have never seen. As our Mandalorians struggle to find their destination, help arises from a really interesting and unexpected place. Mandalorians who survived the Great Purge and now have big crazy sailing ships that sail the seas of glass on Mandalore find our Mandalorians. And thankfully, they're Night Owls who have been long awaiting the return of their savior Bo-Katan. This just adds to the legend of Bo that these men held faith in her for so long. And I think this is important for viewers who didn't watch the Clone Wars or Rebels to see. Bo-Katan is a legend, guys. From here, with all our Mandalorians aboard the Survivor ship, we get some more character development for Bo, and we learn more about her role in the Purge of Mandalore. She, without much choice, surrendered to Moff Gideon under the promise that her people would not be harmed. Bo, doing the noble and sensical thing here, wound up playing right into the Empire's hands. And this led to the downfall of Mandalore. She was duped. She lost the Darksaber, disarmed Mandalore, and as soon as she did that, the Empire went back on their word and glassed them. So not only did Bo inadvertently play a massive part in the Purge of Mandalore, but the depths that she's crawling back from in aims of redemption were just revealed to be much deeper. This is a massive source of sadness for Bo that understandably eats away at her confidence. But Din, a knight in shining armor, came to pull her out of it. Din swears his allegiance to Bo, and from his heart explains why. I really loved this moment, and this shows what Din's new role for this series will be. He's gonna be Bo-Katan's biggest enforcer. From here, the Mandalorians are brought into the Great Forge by their new old allies. A giant monster, of which this season has had no shortage, traps our characters underground at their destination. And boom, we have an Imperial ambush that brings our episode to its peak. Imperial troops outfitted with Beskar and jetpacks are a tough match for our Mandalorians. We get a nerve-wracking firefight that results in our Mandalorians being trapped underground in a secret Imperial facility on Mandalore. At this point, I feel like this series is going full balls to the wall, and now both sides are aware of the threat each other pose. The Mando-Imperial War is underway, but not before, at the hands of Iron Moff Gideon, our main characters suffer their worst loss since the end of Season 1. Din is taken prisoner in a really difficult-to-watch way, TIE fighters are heading to bomb the Mandalorian fleet, and as if all of this wasn't enough, fucking Praetorian guards come in and defeat Paz Vizsla. Paz sacrificed himself for his people to get away. If you told me last week that Paz was gonna die and allowed me to come up with a bunch of theories, I don't know if one of them would have been Praetorian guards taking him out. That's crazy. This is how you end an episode. My jaw was on the floor. Absolutely insane, action-packed, and I'm so ready for next week. Between the Bad Batch season finale and now this, I don't know if I can handle much more. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and stay tuned.